And I said, no, I need it. I really need it tonight.
Good evening, ladies and empress. I just got back from Venice, and boy, are my arms tired.
What if I told you that Mel Brooks, the comedy genius who gave us Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, has been brutally honest about actors he absolutely couldn't work with? While most directors sugarcoat their Hollywood horror stories, the 99-year-old comedy legend has zero filter when it comes to performers who killed his comedic vision. This isn't about difficult personalities or diva behavior. This is about a master filmmaker who values laughs over everything else, and the actors who proved they just couldn't deliver. From Oscar winners who collapsed on set to beloved stars who Brooks publicly humiliated for not being funny enough, these stories reveal the ruthless side of comedy's nicest guy. Brooks once said, "Comedy is not a democracy. If you're not funny, you're fired." And when you hear these 5 stories, complete with Brooks' own savage commentary, you'll understand why the king of comedy would rather rewrite entire films than work with certain actors ever again. By the end of this video, you'll see exactly why Mel Brooks' legendary career wasn't built on being nice. It was built on being hilariously honest about who could make people laugh and who couldn't. The Brooks Standard. Here's what separates Mel Brooks from every other comedy director. He's never been afraid to publicly call out actors who don't meet his standards. While other filmmakers diplomatically say, creative differences, Brooks will straight up tell you an actor wasn't funny enough or killed every joke they touched. But here's the fascinating part. Brooks doesn't hate these actors as people. He just refuses to compromise his comedic vision for anyone, regardless of their star power or studio backing. As he famously said, "I'd rather hurt someone's feelings than bore an audience to death." 3 of these actors were fired or replaced during production. 1 was publicly humiliated on set in front of the entire cast and crew. And 1 legendary star turned down Brooks because his material was too dirty, a rejection that Brooks still jokes about 50 years later. Number 5. Studio-imposed notes actors. The executive puppets, Ryan O'Neal and Burt Reynolds. Coming in at number 5 are what Brooks calls notes actors, performers that studio executives forced into his films despite his objections. The most notorious examples were Ryan O'Neal and Burt Reynolds, 2 massive stars of the 1970s who represented everything Brooks hated about Hollywood interference. During the development of Blazing Saddles, Warner Brothers executives were terrified of the film's controversial content and wanted to cast safe, leading men who could attract mainstream audiences. They pushed hard for Ryan O'Neal to play the Waco Kid, believing his love story popularity would legitimize the project. Brooks met with O'Neal and immediately knew it was wrong. O'Neal approached the material like a romantic drama, asking about his character's emotional journey and suggesting ways to make the Waco Kid more sympathetic. Brooks later recalled, "Ryan wanted to know his character's motivation. I said, 'Your motivation is to be funny. Can you do that?'" The meeting ended when O'Neal suggested that the film could benefit from more heart and less crude humor. Brooks' response became legendary. "Ryan, if I wanted heart, I'd make a Hallmark card. I want laughs." Similarly, Burt Reynolds was heavily courted for multiple Brooks projects throughout the 1970s. Reynolds' agent constantly pitched him for roles, believing his southern charm would work well in Brooks' comedies. But Brooks saw Reynolds as too concerned with maintaining his leading man image. Brooks once said, "Burt was afraid to look foolish, which is death in comedy. He wanted to be the cool guy who gets the girl, not the guy who falls in the horse trough. I need actors who'll dive into that trough head first." The breaking point came when Reynolds' team suggested he could do a Brooks film as long as he doesn't have to do anything too undignified. Brooks' response was swift. "Undignified, that's my specialty. If you can't be undignified, you can't be in my movies." Brooks' philosophy became clear. When the suits say he's hot, I say he's not. I don't care if an actor can sell tickets if they can't sell a joke. Number 4. Method actors. The Fun Police. Robert De Niro and Al Pacino. At number 4 are the method actors who took themselves too seriously to play in Brooks' comedic sandbox. The most notable examples were Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, two titans of 1970s cinema who proved that dramatic brilliance doesn't translate to comedic gold. Brooks has been brutally honest about his encounters with De Niro. In the late 1970s, De Niro's representatives approached Brooks about a potential collaboration. Brooks was initially excited. Working with one of America's greatest actors seemed like a dream opportunity. But their meeting at a Beverly Hills restaurant went disastrously wrong. De Niro arrived having researched Brooks' previous films and wanted to discuss the psychological underpinnings of his characters. He asked Brooks to explain the deeper meaning behind his comedic choices. Brooks later described the encounter. "Bobby starts psychoanalyzing my jokes, asking about the subtext of a pie fight. I'm thinking, kid, sometimes a pie in the face is just a pie in the face." He was more serious about my comedy than I was. The breaking point came when De Niro suggested that Brooks' humor could be elevated through more serious character work. Brooks' response was classic. "Bobby, you elevate drama. I elevate laughs. Let's stick to what we know." Al Pacino presented a similar problem during discussions for History of the World Part 1. Pacino was interested in playing multiple historical characters, believing it would showcase his range, but his approach was pure method. He wanted to research each historical period and develop detailed backstories for every character. Brooks listened to Pacino's pitch about bringing emotional truth to historical parody before interrupting. "Al, you're talking about making a documentary. I'm making a comedy where Caesar gets a wedgie. These are different things." Pacino persisted, explaining how method techniques could add depth to the humor. Brooks' patience finally snapped. "Al, the only depth I need is how deep the audience laughs. Can you make them laugh, or should I call someone who can?" Brooks later explained his philosophy. "Give me someone who can play. Don't give me a method actor who thinks mumbling is acting. These guys want to find the pain in every punchline. I just want the punchline to land." Number 3. John Wayne, the moral cowboy. Number 3 is John Wayne, and this rejection story perfectly captures the clash between Brooks' irreverent humor and old Hollywood's moral standards. In 1973, Brooks personally approached Wayne at Warner Brothers' studio to offer him the role of the Waco Kid in Blazing Saddles. Wayne was initially flattered by the offer and agreed to read the script. Brooks was genuinely excited about the possibility of working with the legendary cowboy star, believing Wayne's presence would give the film incredible credibility. But when Wayne finished reading the script, he called Brooks with his decision. "Mel," Wayne said, "this is too dirty for my image. I can't say these words or be in scenes like this." Brooks understood Wayne's position but couldn't resist having some fun with the rejection. He later joked, "Duke told me he couldn't punch a horse or say, 'but.' I said, 'John, that's not even the dirty stuff. Wait until you get to page 30. The irony wasn't lost on Brooks that Wayne, who'd played countless violent characters, drew the line at comedy. He could shoot 100 guys in a Western, but he couldn't tell a fart joke. That's Hollywood morality for you. Brooks respected Wayne's decision, but used the rejection as material for years. At dinner parties, he'd imitate Wayne's voice saying, "I'm sorry, Mel, but the Duke doesn't do bathroom humor." When Gene Wilder ultimately got the role, Brooks told him, "Gene, you're playing the part John Wayne was too clean for. Make it as dirty as possible." The film's success vindicated Brooks's vision, but he always wondered what Blazing Saddles would have been like with John Wayne delivering Wilder's lines. "Probably terrible," Brooks admitted, "but it would have been interesting, terrible." Number 2, Gig Young, The Disaster. At number 2 is Gig Young, and this story represents Brooks' most traumatic casting experience. In 1973, Brooks hired the Oscar-winning actor to play the Waco Kid in Blazing Saddles, believing Young's real-life struggles with alcoholism would bring authenticity to the role of a washed-up gunfighter. Brooks thought he was being clever by casting against type. Young was known for sophisticated romantic comedies, and Brooks wanted to show his dramatic range while adding credibility to the Western parody. But on the first day of filming, everything went catastrophically wrong. Young arrived on set clearly struggling with alcohol withdrawal symptoms. Brooks initially thought the actor was just nervous, but it quickly became apparent that something was seriously wrong. During the first scene, Young began sweating profusely and stumbling over his lines. Then in the middle of a take, he collapsed and began vomiting green bile all over the set. Brooks later described the scene, "Wait, are we shooting The Exorcist here?" Because that's what it looked like. Production immediately shut down while Young was rushed to the hospital. Brooks was left with a major role unfilled and a production schedule in chaos. But his response was typically pragmatic. He called Gene Wilder that same day. "Gene," Brooks said, "I need you to save my movie. Can you be here tomorrow?" Wilder agreed, and Brooks rewrote the role specifically for his comedic sensibilities. Brooks has been surprisingly compassionate about Young's situation, saying, "Gig was a talented man fighting demons I couldn't understand. I just wish he'd fought them before showing up to my set." The incident taught Brooks to be more careful about casting actors with known personal problems. "I make comedies, not interventions," he later said. "If you can't show up sober, don't show up at all." Number 1, Bill Pullman, the unfunny leading man. And at number 1, the most surprising entry, Bill Pullman from Spaceballs. This story reveals Brooks at his most ruthless because Pullman wasn't fired or replaced. He was systematically humiliated throughout the entire production. Brooks cast Pullman as Lone Star, the Han Solo parody, believing his earnest leading man qualities would work well against the film's absurd universe. But from the first day of filming, Brooks realized he'd made a terrible mistake. The problem wasn't that Pullman was a bad actor, it was that he wasn't funny. In a cast featuring comedy legends like John Candy, Rick Moranis, and Joan Rivers, Pullman stood out for all the wrong reasons. The breaking point came during a scene where John Candy suggested that Pullman deliver a particular joke. Brooks's response was swift and brutal. "You think Pullman can make the line funny?" Pullman? Okay, we're cutting that line. This happened in front of the entire cast and crew, and it set the tone for the rest of the production. Brooks began systematically removing Pullman's comedic moments, reducing him to a straight man surrounded by funnier performers. Brooks later admitted, "Bill is a lovely man and a good actor, but I didn't hire him for laughs. And when you're not funny in a Mel Brooks movie, you might as well be invisible." The most devastating moment came when Brooks was asked about Pullman's performance during a press interview. His response was characteristically blunt. "Bill Pullman is the only actor in Spaceballs who isn't funny. That wasn't the plan, but that's what happened." Pullman has never publicly responded to Brooks' criticism, but industry insiders say the experience was deeply humiliating for the actor. Brooks, however, has no regrets. "I'm not running a charity for unfunny actors. If you can't deliver laughs, I'll find someone who can." The Brooks method revealed. What these 5 stories reveal is Brooks' unwavering commitment to comedy above all else. He's willing to fire Oscar winners, reject legends, and publicly humiliate leading men if they threaten his comedic vision. Brooks operates on a simple principle: funny trumps everything. It doesn't matter if you're a method actor, a movie star, or a studio favorite. If you can't make people laugh, you have no place in a Mel Brooks film. Each of these conflicts represents a different threat to Brooks' process. Ryan O'Neal and Burt Reynolds threatened his creative control with their image concerns. De Niro and Pacino threatened his spontaneous style with their method approach. John Wayne threatened his irreverent content with his moral standards. Gig Young threatened his professional standards with his personal problems. Bill Pullman threatened his comedic integrity with his lack of humor. Brooks recognized that compromising on any of these fronts would have weakened his films and disappointed his audiences. The Legacy of Ruthlessness. Brooks' willingness to be brutally honest about actors' comedic abilities is why his films remain timeless. While other comedy directors of his era played politics and protected egos, Brooks protected laughs. The actors he did work with repeatedly, Gene Wilder, Madeline Kahn, Harvey Korman, Dom DeLuise, understood that Brooks' criticism came from love of comedy, not personal malice. They were willing to be directed, corrected, and even replaced if it served the greater good of making people laugh. Brooks's approach influenced generations of comedy filmmakers who learned that sometimes the most important creative decision is knowing who can't deliver what you need. The Mel Brooks Philosophy. At 98 years old, Brooks has no regrets about his harsh treatment of these actors. He's often said that his greatest responsibility is to his audience, not to performers' feelings. As Brooks explained in a recent interview, "No, I could have been nicer to some of these people, but would my movies have been funnier? Would audiences have laughed more? I don't think so. My job is to make people happy, not to make actors comfortable." This philosophy, choosing audience satisfaction over industry relationships, is why Mel Brooks remains the king of comedy, while these actors learned the hard way that not everyone is cut out for his particular brand of genius. The bottom line: Mel Brooks didn't become a comedy legend by being diplomatic or politically correct. He became a legend by demanding excellence and refusing to accept anything less than hilarious. These 5 stories aren't about a mean director picking on innocent actors. They're about a master craftsman who understood that comedy is serious business and that protecting the laugh is more important than protecting feelings. That's a lesson every creative person can learn from. Sometimes being honest about what doesn't work is the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved. Which of these Brooks rejections surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more film lore.